The thing that bothers me the most isn't like, I'm not asking for you to like be my friend. But you should be curious because I'm pulling 40 points ahead.
Right.
At least just reach out and be like, hey, what are you actually? Because they've never spoken ever. I've never gotten a phone call. No one's ever reached out. I've never talked to anybody in leadership. No one's ever been interested in which is like kind of baffling.
I actually don't think it's baffling. I think it's pretty clear. Democrats don't care about winning. They just care about serving their donors, as you're going to see amply in this story. They backed Janet Mills, and she got clowned. And she's the governor of Maine and got clobbered by Graham Platner. There he was on Jon Stewart's podcast and explaining that they never even reached out to figure out how he got that 40-point lead, because they don't care. All they care about is serving the donor class loyally. Win or lose doesn't matter to Chuck Schumer and the rest of the Democratic leadership. So we said that Platner was more likely to win the primary and more likely to win the general election. Now we're going to show you polls in a minute that show you who was right and who was wrong. Spoiler alert, Chuck Schumer is an idiot. Okay, so Janet Mills dropping out today had a long note about why she was dropping out. I'll read you a portion of it. She said, while I have the drive and passion, commitment and experience, and above all else, the fight to continue on, I very simply do not have the one thing that political campaigns unfortunately require today, the financial resources. That is why today I've made the incredibly difficult decision to suspend my campaign for the United States Senate. That's of course not true. She was getting mauled and she was going to get humiliated on election day and she left. How do I know that's not true? Let me give you the next fact. Platner raised $4.1 million in the first quarter of this year. That's a great number. While Mills took in $2.7 million. That's just in one quarter. AOC won her election with a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that amount. But she's like corporate Democrat. She's like, oh, I'm only raising about $3 million every 3 months. Only $1 million a month. How could I win with such little resources? I didn't know that the grassroots could have more money than me. The whole thing I was banking on was I overwhelmed him with money like a good corporate Democrat. Then I serve Israel and all corporations. What went wrong? Well, you could ask him. She's like, no. And if you notice, there was one thing that she left out there. She did not endorse Graham Platner. Vote blue no matter who, unless it's a populist or anyone on the left or an outsider or someone who's clean and doesn't take corporate PAC money and doesn't serve foreign governments, in which case, get out of here. I guarantee you, if Chuck Schumer, Janet Mills will probably vote for Susan Collins, okay? The Republican in the race. If Chuck Schumer and everyone in Democratic leadership lived in Maine, I would bet and on every dollar I had that they would vote for Susan Collins over Graham Platner, okay? So now I want to bring Ryan Grimm in here. I've got a lot more for you, Ryan, on the polls and how this race went, but what's your 2 cents to start?
Well, Schumer did come out, right, with the Democratic Party and say, okay, he's now the presumptive nominee, which makes Janet Mills refusing to get behind him kind of even more stark. I think you're right. Like, I think she will ultimately endorse him. She'll do an event with him or something. I think privately, if you could get her ballot, she's voting for Susan Collins. Like, I think she won't admit it, but she's doing it. And how much money does she actually need to get to what I think it was June 8th or 9th was the primary? She's Janet Mills. She's the governor. Like, she's been in Maine politics for many, many decades. Everyone in Maine knows who she is. She could not do another campaign event between now and June 9th and 8th or whatever. And if people liked her, they'd vote for her. So yeah, it wasn't money, but the fact that he was outraising her is connected to the fact that he was trouncing her on every other level.
Yeah, for sure. So now let's find out who was right and who was wrong. We go back to the beginning of this primary and we quote the legendary fearsome leader, Chuck Schumer. He said, we think that Janet Mills is the best candidate to retire Susan Collins. She's a tested 2-term governor and the people of Maine have an enormous amount of affection and respect for her. Do they, Chuck? Okay, well, when the campaign started, that was the case. Nobody had heard of Graham Platner, although he rose up super quickly because he said he wasn't gonna represent the donor class. And everybody's like, yep, that's what we want, yep. And Janet Mills is like, oh, but the donors are so precious and wonderful. I love them so much. But in the beginning, since people didn't know that, it starts out 47-37, Janet Mills on top. At that point, all the wise men of Washington are like, oh, you see that? You can't vote for an outsider. That's oh, she has a wonderful experience. She's been selling out to donors for decades. What great experience. See, she's gonna crush that guy, right? Well, is that how it turned out? Let's look at one of the latest polls in that race. Oh, yeah, that's 64-29. Platner in the lead. That's a 35-point lead. I've seen other polls at 38 points, and it is not close. He crushed her. And the reason is obvious. The American people are looking for populists who represent voters instead of the super rich and powerful. Shocking. I swear to you that every Democrat in Washington, or almost every Democrat, is genuinely shocked by that. They're like, oh, they want us to work for them? Instead of precious donors? No, they're all anti-Semites. Okay, so let's see how this is going. Now, this is the New York Times talking about the race. Her decision to withdraw reflects a political environment being rapidly reshaped by a restive Democratic grassroots that is demanding a new, younger, and far more combative generation of leadership. You got that right, brother. And hey, New York Times got something right.
Look, one of the biggest problems with political media right now isn't just bias. It's how quickly the same story gets spun into two completely different realities depending on who's telling it. That's why I recommend Ground News. It's a website and app that pulls together reporting from across the political spectrum so you can compare how the same story is being covered, who's covering it, and what kind of narrative they're pushing. Take this story about Pete Hegseth refusing to rule out US troops on the ground in Iran. On Ground News, you can immediately see how differently outlets frame that same development. The Daily Signal downplays the danger by stressing that this isn't Iraq and that the war won't be endless. NBC, meanwhile, focuses on the key fact that Hegseth would not rule out American boots on the ground in Iran. Same story, two completely different realities. And Ground News makes that obvious right away. You can compare headlines side by side, see the bias distribution of the coverage, check the factuality ratings of the sources, and even see who owns the outlets behind the reporting. That matters because once you understand how stories are being framed, you start to see how public consent gets manufactured. Ground News also has a blind spot feed that highlights stories that one side of the political spectrum is barely covering. So you're not just trapped inside the version of the world your algorithm wants to feed you. If you're tired of being fed somebody else's narrative, I genuinely recommend Ground News. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code. Using our link gets you 40% off Ground News Vantage plan, and you can also gift a subscription directly through Ground News.
They continue, her failure to gain traction also underscores how the mechanics of campaigns have shifted. Mills, who had insisted on that state already knew her well, struggled to break through Platner's dominance on social media and liberal podcasts, but she did not try to match his far more robust campaign schedule. You know why? Because she thought, I'm gonna raise more money than him, and then I'm gonna buy all these deceptive ads, and I'm gonna say, he's a Nazi! All outsiders, whether they're right wing or left wing, are all Nazis, and then I'm gonna cruise to victory. And he's like, okay, run your stupid deceptive ads that don't work at all anymore, and I'll just go on the shows and tell them what I really think. Well, now Janet Mills could have obviously matched that. She could have just been like, oh, okay, I'll go on the shows. And since I have the better record and the people of Maine have such love, affection, and respect for me, as Chuck Schumer knows, then I'll easily win. Except she didn't go on any of the shows. Why didn't she? Because her record is indefensible. And Democrats think like, oh, I am above podcasts and online media. Where's my friends at MSNBC? Tell everybody to vote for me, okay? How's that working out for you, Janet? Oh, right, you're in retirement, so it's not working out at all. So Platner did all of this, of course, without a scintilla of help from the DNC. Here he is explaining it.
Have you felt any sense of any curiosity? Has there been any, hey, Graham, I'm a more establishment guy. You seem to be resonating. What do you think is going on? Or do they view you again through the prism of insurgent. This insurgent must be stopped.
As of late, past few months, there's been a lot more reach out from like individual people, kind of in the like senators. Honestly, I think there are a lot of senators now. There are a bunch of senators like Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, Chris Van Hollen, that whole crew. Who Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, who like they reached out early on. Past couple months though, there has been more reach out from I would say more kind of like establishment folks. However, and this is the important part, not from the DSCC, not from the DNC, like nobody in the places of power remains interested.
But they're lost, dude.
It's so bad.
You guys, such a relief to hear people say things that are obviously true. We've been saying that for about 20 years on the Young Turks, where like 99.8% of Washington was like, oh, no. They're doing 4-dimensional, 8-dimensional chess. They've got this thing totally figured out. Oh, God damn it, I can't believe we barely lost to Trump again. I don't know how, but we haven't figured out. We haven't totally figured out. So now they say, oh, don't worry about Platner, okay? We won't let that populist win. Well, we failed, but now our brothers and sisters, the lovely, awesome corporate Republicans, will destroy him, and they look like they're almost gleeful at the opportunity. So here's another quote from the New York Times. According to them, Mills told the New York Times in an interview last month that they will tear him apart if he's the nominee. Almost looking forward to it. It seemed like she was. In January, the Maine Super PAC for Senate Republicans announced its largest ever investment in Maine, $42 million to support Collins. I can't wait for them to burn all that money in a bonfire, right? Like, oh, we are running ads. He has the wrong kind of tattoo. Remember, everyone serve Israel. Okay, please burn it in a beautiful bonfire in Maine. I come and stew some lobster over it. Okay, so these are the kind of gross ads that they're gonna run that are not gonna work. Watch.
Graham Platner blames Maine's women for getting raped because he says they get up drunk. And Platner bragged about having a Nazi tattoo on his chest. That's the real Graham Platner. Pine Tree Results PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Pine Tree Results, that sounds so refreshing. Like a breath of fresh air, pine trees. I bet they're for pine trees. Wait, this is weird. Our guest host here, who's one of the best reporters in the country, wrote the PAC, funded by Blackstone's CEO, Steven Schwartzman, and Palantir's Alex Karp, is putting $2 million behind this ad. So that's the surveillance state and Israel weighing in and going, now remember, they don't want to say he doesn't support Israel because then his numbers will go up another 20 points. So they're like, he kicks puppies and women, and did you know what he wrote in 1987? Okay, yeah. Hey, Janet Mills tried that. So please waste another 42 million doing that. So finally, that's gonna work, right? I mean, Schumer was right, Mills was right. That's weird. A late March poll from Emerson College showed Platner with 48% support among likely Maine voters to Collins 41% with 12% undecided. Looks like he's got a 7-point lead over Susan Collins, who Democratic leadership has never been able to defeat. Because do they really want to defeat her? I don't know a better Democrat than Susan Collins. And that is not a damning, that's not praise of Susan Collins, that's damning of the Democratic Party leadership. Ryan, so you broke the story about how it's an ad from the usual lobbies that have come in to weigh in on Maine. So what do you think? Is the general election going to be any different? Are the Republicans going to get him by talking about his Nazi tattoo?
I don't see how that stuff doesn't just keep backfiring. And also, all of the money they spend, I think, is also going to backfire because, and one of the other billionaires that has given to that $2 million, which will grow to 2, 3, 10, 20, 30 million by the end of it, is this guy Mark Rowan from Apollo, this private equity firm Apollo. He's also on Trump's board of peace. He's a massive donor to AIPAC. But importantly for Maine, and we wrote about this, his private equity company bought up 2 paper mills in 2 mill towns in Maine, in Jay and Bucksport. And you know how private equity works. They don't come in and say, we love this business because it's profitable and our guys went to Harvard, they're smart, they're gonna figure out how to save you a little bit of money here and there. We're going to be even more profitable and everybody's going to win. That's not what they do. They come in and they figure out legally, or borderline legally, how they can loot the place. And so what they did with these paper mills is they basically, as soon as they bought the paper mills, they forced the company to take out a $250 million loan and then pay that $250 million in a dividend to the private equity company, Mark Rowan, who gives money to this super PAC. Like, that is, somehow that's not a crime, but think about that. So you buy a company with debt. They bought it with debt. They didn't buy it with their own money. They force it to take on more debt. Then they force it to take out money. Then they take the money. Then now what happened? Now the mills aren't profitable anymore because they have this huge debt service to make. So you file bankruptcy for the paper mills. And then in bankruptcy, you take the pension funds to pay off the debts that you've rolled up. And then you sell off everything, the parts and everything else. You sell off the real estate, you just harvest the thing, and you destroy 2 towns in the process. So unfortunately for Susan Collins, one of the places that her donors did this, or 2 of the places, are 2 mill towns in Maine. So every time that they're up on the air saying this guy had a Nazi tattoo, Platner's gonna be able to say, this is paid for by the guys that destroyed Jay and Bucksport. And now they're taking that mill and turning it into a data center, which nobody wants there. So across the board, these are incredibly, horribly unpopular policies. I'm curious, Cenk, though, do you think it's a coincidence that this long interview with Jon Stewart dropped, where Jon Stewart is like, this is who Democrats should be behind, this is what Democrats ought to be? And then right after that, Janet Mills is like, all right, I'm done. Like, it feels to me like it was actually Jon Stewart that like put the final nail in this coffin.
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to come back to it because I think it's actually very relevant to this entire phenomenon that we're seeing across the country. But I have a question for you first. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what kind of tattoos does Mark Rowan have?
That's true.
Yeah, I mean,
if his to find out.
I mean, if his tattoos are better than Graham Platner's tattoos, then obviously we should vote for Susan Collins.
And so Platner and his campaign managers had a press conference this evening, and they were saying that their research shows, they're like polling and everything else, shows that almost everyone in Maine knows everything about all of this stuff because of all of the coverage. Janet Mills spent millions of dollars putting it on the air, and then now Susan Collins' PAC is spending millions of dollars putting it on the air. So everybody already knows this, and his numbers just keep going up because people are sick of this thing where they find something that you said 15 or 20 years ago and say that you are now disqualified from public life. People don't want that to be the standard, and people understand that. Okay, he said things on Reddit. Well, Reddit is like, that's where people just like have conversations. So that's almost like this person said this in their dorm room. And like, you and I are old people. If somebody came to us and were like, he said this in a dorm room in 1998, we'd be like, okay, that sounds like a thing he probably shouldn't have said, but it was a dorm room in 1998. Why are you bothering me with this? Like, what does he say today? Who is he now? And so that's how that stuff comes off, I think, to anybody who's not old like us, and also to like a lot of older people who like understand how the world works today.
Yeah, so I mean, things that you said 20 years ago being used to cancel you. I might be patient zero.
Actually, it's in your own dorm room. That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been canceled in every kind of way. But
you made the mistake of putting your dorm room comments into like a column and putting them into the paper. Yeah.
Yeah, in like one of the first blogs ever. I'm like the first like YouTube partner. We're the first to get canceled for 20-year-old blogs, etc. Right? So they've tried this trick.
No, my co-host over at Breaking Points, when she ran for Congress, they found photos of her at like a costume party that were a little risque and like canceled her.
Yeah, but to be fair,
you remember there was a national scandal.
Yeah, 100% remember, I covered it. and defended her. And this is the oldest trick in the book. And it's weird how they never found any indiscreet pictures of Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or George Bush or anyone. It's so weird. The establishment apparently has no. You're right. They can't even find anything on Epstein. Come on, right? So, and by the way, guys, if you don't know, to point that Brian was making about private equity, I mean, that has devastated our country. They did it to Sears, Kmart, Toys R Us, almost every brand you know. And then they're like, oh yeah, the internet destroyed them. People are just buying online. No, private equity came in and raped them, totally destroyed those businesses, those American businesses, and laughed all the way to the bank and thought, who cares if your kids don't get toys? We just robbed that place of hundreds of millions of dollars and oftentimes billions. Now, to your question, and by the way, they've become so toxic, all of these corporate goons, and they've overused the charge of Nazi so many times that I now think that people, when they hear that some candidate is being called a Nazi, they don't think the guy's an actual Nazi. They think, oh, he's an outsider that the corporate goons are attacking. I should look into him. Like, my God, what are you doing, right? So
also, I have a outside the box thought on that too. Curious for your take on this. The biggest thing that some Republicans think they have on Graham is from his Reddit post and also just kind of his politics in general. They're like, he's too far left. They're like, he's too far out the mainstream. But if they try to say that at the same time that they are constantly calling him a Nazi, feels like a regular voter is like, all right, well, I'm gonna dismiss all of this and I'm just gonna listen to the guy. So I think it actually really undercuts what they could have as a potentially, like, from their perspective, reasonable threat. Susan Collins had a statement that said something like, I look forward to, taking on this like professed communist Nazi. And people are like, I'm sure regular people are like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. How can you be both? You can't be both.
Yeah.
Okay, so never mind, I'm not gonna listen to anything you say. So I actually think in some ways, every time they mention that he's a Nazi, people are like, A, I don't believe that, but B, Nazi, Marine, like, and then you're gonna tell me he's too far left. Like, culturally, that doesn't scan.
Yeah.
So seems reasonable to me.
Right, and I made that point at least half a dozen times on this show. So is he a Nazi or is he a communist? Right. I know he can't be both. And so, and even look, let's talk about the phrase that they use, right? So again, with Nazi, especially in a general election, when you're telling independents and right wingers, this guy is a Nazi. Well, they've heard that about themselves a lot, right?
Right.
And they know that it was a lie about them, or they think that it was a lie about them, right?
Even if it's true.
Right? So they're like, oh, is he one of us? And a lot of independents go, oh, does that mean he rationally opposes the genocide of Israel, right? Like, and it turns out he does, right? And so what does it mean to be too far left these days? Well, he's not doing culture war stuff. He's not doing identity politics. Right. So all that's left is economic populism. But if you're accusing him of being too economically populist, you're accidentally running an ad for him, right?
Yeah.
And so, to come back to your question about Jon Stewart, I think Jon Stewart's now an interesting avatar for a bridge between old media and new media, right? He's doing a podcast that's a new media, digital media, right? But he's mainly known for being the host of The Daily Show today, but mainly back in the day, right? So he's a trusted, figure from old media. So when Jon Stewart, and I would put in one other group in this category, Pod Save America, come out against you, then it feels like a nail in the coffin. Oh, well, look, and they're wrong because those guys are now generally honest, right? And Jon Stewart 1,000,000%, and doesn't have an interest in like towing the party line. But their brain triggers, oh, even the party line, Jon Stewart was on TV, etc. Pod Save America is the Obama guys. Well, even if they've turned against me and I'm down 35 points, I guess I gotta go, right? But all of this, Ryan, leads back to let me ask it this way. If Platner wins, what happens next? Like, I know that Democratic leadership will come out and go, oh, we are very happy, as they're like weeping. Oh, I'm so sorry, Israel. We tried to get the Republican to win, but we couldn't pull it off. Anyway, but they'll say that, oh, there's no lessons to be learned there, right? But how impactful do you think it'll be, given that we have a new media and everyone thinks that everyone on TV is enormous liars and we wouldn't trust them if our life depended on it? Is this gonna spread like wildfire throughout the country, or are the Democrats going to be able to put out that fire?
I think it depends. If we're living in a world where Dan Osborne also wins, let's say Ossoff wins re-election with his, I don't know if you saw his campaign ad he put out yesterday. You would love it if you haven't seen it yet. He's running on extremely economic populist issues. Sherrod Brown comes back in Ohio. Like if all the four of those happen, then it's a wrap for this party establishment's attempt to use culture war to push aside economic populism. And at that point, Democratic Party just has to lean into small donors, lean into the grassroots, and say, look, we're not getting the big donors anymore. But you know what we're gonna get people, and we're gonna be able to match, not dollar for dollar with the billionaires, but enough that we're in the ball game. And it's so much more expensive to be for corruption and for something that people don't want, that if you have 20% of the money, but you're over a certain threshold, then you can beat $10 million with $2 million if you're on the side of truth and they're on the side of corruption. So I think there is a real world in which if a bunch of these candidates win on that message, and Platner beats Susan Collins after Susan Collins beat every single establishment avatar that the party could throw at her cycle after cycle, I do think it could be transformative.
Yeah, again, another case where we were patient zero. That was our thesis when we started Justice Democrats, that you don't need to have more money, you just need to have enough money. Once you're past the threshold, then we can win, and we have. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.